As always, thank you so much for having me. Beet team, it's wonderful to be here. I come to every one of these that I can because I learn an enormous amount about what's going on across the industry, and it makes me smarter and better at my job as a research analyst at Forrester, which is what I do for a living. So I am here today to moderate some conversations, but first to talk to you a little bit about some research I'm working on right now that is on the future of advertising. And when I say that, I usually say parentheses, no big deal. Like, okay, the future of advertising, how on earth do you tackle such a topic? So I wanted to sort of share some of the thoughts with you on kind of the research I'm doing and what I'm thinking about, by the way, with lots of help from lots of other analysts, because this is a very big topic. And we're taking an aperture of about 3 to 5 years out. So this is not the future of advertising in 2020. This is not also the future of advertising in the world of Blade Runner. This is sort of, where are things going in a way that feels like we're moving past the immediate and the obvious, but is right on our kind of front door, right? So I'll start by saying, just right up front, that advertising is not going anywhere. If you were wondering if I was going to say that it was going to disappear, I'm not. It is a truism, right? It is a balancing act between publishers, marketers, and consumers. And everybody gets something from advertising. Every one of those groups gets something, right? Marketers drive business performance, publishers get revenue to fund content, and in spite of what they might say, consumers do in fact delight, and learn and buy through advertising. And really, everything else in the advertising ecosystem, whether it's the ad tech, whether it's the data companies, even agencies, are enablers, but really middleware. So when you look at the future of advertising, you really have to look at it through the lens of those 3 big constituencies. So that's thing 1. Thing 2 is that advertising has existed over the last in its modern form over the last couple of 100 years as one, as I said, that was relatively in balance. Now there's tension, of course. No consumer is going to say, I love advertising, yay for advertising. But it has been a thing that they could understand. And it existed in a way that felt balanced as part of their overall experience in exchange for access to content. What you're finding now is that we've lost the balance. So thing 2 is that the balance part of the equation is gone. And that is bad. What's going on? Well, the reality is that consumers now have the ability to get away from advertising in ways that are sort of unprecedented. Yes, in the world of television, they could get up and leave the room. But they are now skipping ads and blocking ads at rates that should be alarming to all of us. In the ad industry, we know from Forrester's research that more than half of US online adults will say they engage in explicit avoidant behavior around advertising across several channels, including offline ones. Now, maybe not surprising, it's worse for online channels, but it's something that is unbelievable. More than half are saying that they are explicitly trying to get away from this stuff. So if it's out of balance, what's the byproduct of that? Well, the byproduct of that is not good for publishers, right? If a consumer doesn't see your ad, how do you, with a straight face, say to an advertiser, I am delivering value to you through this expensive ad placement? And if a consumer isn't seeing the ad, then how does an advertiser continue to generate the kind of business performance that they are required to generate? It's their jobs. So we have to sort of ask ourselves, if it's out of balance, what got us to this place and what happens next? So let's talk for a second about what got us to this place. Thing 1, we tend to still think in terms of very traditional notions of segmentation, right? So there's the obvious one, which is age and gender, that still certainly powers much of the television advertising industry. And thankfully, we'll talk about how that is continuing to evolve over the next few days. But it is still really prevalent. But we also tend to think of things like behavioral signals as somehow representative of consumers and use that as a way to develop segmentation. But consumers are so much more complicated and nuanced than that. Really interesting stat for you, 52% of millennials think that gender is a spectrum. And 12% of them identify as trans or gender nonconforming. Those are your audiences of the future, and they think this notion of gender doesn't work, right? That's major, that's a major shift. So that's thing 1, the way we think about segmentation. Thing 2, the way we buy media. It just doesn't work anymore. We still buy media in silos. It's still very common to find the traditional planning team and buying team and then the digital team and even maybe the paid social team and the search team and the programmatic team, and they're all separate. And the reality is that the way that consumers consume media is so much different than it was before. Not only is it fragmented and complicated, but they're also doing things like using two devices at the same time. So they're doing things like simultaneously consuming two different things across two different devices. And the way that we think about media and media mixes does not account for that effectively. And then the third thing is that the way that we message to consumers, which has worked really for certainly the last 50 years, is also not good enough anymore. The reality is that the way that consumers can access information means that information asymmetry, which has always benefited the seller, whether you are the advertiser or even the publisher to the advertiser, but let's just talk about advertisers for a second. In a world of information asymmetry, the advertiser could kind of say whatever they wanted to the consumer in advertising. And that's where the consumer got information. That is simply not true anymore. We do not live in a world of information asymmetry anymore. Consumers can get access to any information that they want. And by the way, they're not just turning to search engines, they're turning to their friends. So things like word of mouth are also breaking this traditional paradigm of what you can say in an ad and have some kind of effective way of connecting with the consumer. So 3 big things, right? The way we segment, the way we buy, and the way we message. Okay. So you've got all this stuff going on, but in the meantime, in some cases, just concurrently because of business dynamics, and in some cases causally, because of the things that I'm talking about, you've got these giant mega forces going on that are also shaping the future of advertising. Huge one, privacy, and our ability to get access to consumer data. That is going to reshape how advertising works. It's already starting to happen, but I don't think we're paying enough attention. 2, the cookie. Now I understand that in the world of television this is less of an issue, but the entire digital advertising industry, of which many of you are involved, certainly implicated, is built on a mechanism that is dying and very quickly is going to be in the ground and buried. And that is the infrastructure that everybody uses. Thing 3, the way that we think about ad formats is also starting to be upended. So the print ad of digital, the good old-fashioned banner ad that's been around for 25 years, finally the growth has stalled. It's hitting a point where companies are asking questions about its sort of future utility and really getting innovative around ad formats. So not knowing that Hulu was going to be here, Hulu gets a shout out in the research, doing things like the pause ad, taking advantage of an actual consumer behavior to show an ad that's funny and not interruptive, that's appropriate in the moment. Or companies like Triple Lift that are doing some crazy things in over the top, where they're actually doing things like inserting products or swapping products into professionally produced content, kind of on a one-to-one, household to household basis. Like that's super, super innovative stuff. Thing 4, the walled gardens. The ones that exist today are getting wallier, and the ones that don't exist are starting to raise their walls. And so what do all of these things mean when you take all of these forces? What they mean to me is that we're looking at a future that is far less open, that is far less broad-based, that is significantly less audience targeting driven in the way that it has been. I'm just going to spray the internet, I'm going to throw a third-party audience segment on top of it, and I'm just going to buy it all cheaply and programmatically. Those days are starting to wane. And we're going to have a future that is significantly more closed, more curated, more controlled, and much more driven by consumers telling us what they want and what they're okay with. With me so far? Right. I'm not going to give it all away because then you wouldn't read the research, and I want you to read the research. But I will say this, just a kind of quick last thought. I think it probably would be easy for the television industry to sort of pat itself on the back and say, whatever, those digital people are idiots, and they totally screwed up, and we're awesome, and consumers love us, and we're totally immune. I just don't buy that. Because the reality is that we very much could fall into so many of the same traps with this thing called the TV screen that we fell into with digital. TV advertising could be creepy. It could be intrusive. It could be aggressive. It could follow people around. It could disrespect their tolerance for advertising, whether length or volume. We could use smart TV data or set-top box data in a way that makes consumers go, I feel violated, I'm not comfortable with with this, or regulators, or both. And all this fun stuff that we're talking about for the next 3 days would get flipped upside down. So what I'm interested in is a future that's a lot more thoughtful, a lot more collaborative, a lot more connected, where we're following a principle of the spirit of the intent of consumer choice and control and preference, not the letter, which means no shady back office deals around data, no skirting around the rules of privacy, because I suspect if we do those things, which I know we have the kind of in our gut, sort of the secret desire to do, I guarantee we will be back here in 5 years and we will be facing a future where those things have been shut down, and we'll be at the Beet Retreat and we're gonna ask ourselves, now what do we do? So just some initial thoughts, kind of a bummer. I love to be a bummer. To kick off a day where we talk about how we don't do those things, but take best advantage of all of the amazing assets that all of you have to create an advertising future that is sustainable.